My husband discovered my infidelity and kicked me out of the house, so I told him it didn't matter, that my lover would pick me up. I called him and he arrived in 10 minutes in his very expensive car. We went for a drive and when we finished he asked me, "And where am I going to drop you off?" Apparently he didn't want me to live with him just because he has a wife. I cannot believe how dramatic Mark, my husband, can be when faced with a situation that requires maturity. We built a life together, a beautiful home, or so I thought before his underlying insecurity ruined everything. I always gave my all to that household, sacrificing my own peace to maintain an image of absolute perfection. Relationships require constant nourishment, and when a husband completely neglects his partner's basic emotional needs, things naturally drift. Mark never understood that a woman like me needs constant validation, intellectual stimulation, and a certain level of lifestyle appreciation. Instead of focusing on his own flaws as a partner, he chose to become obsessed with monitoring me. Our daily routine became utterly suffocating because Mark was constantly wrapped up in his own small world. I tried to drop subtle hints for months that I was feeling unfulfilled, but he completely ignored my emotional well-being. That is precisely when Julian, a deeply sophisticated and wealthy man I met recently, entered the picture to provide the emotional support I deserve. Julian understood my worth from the very beginning, speaking to me with the respect and admiration that Mark completely lacked. It wasn't about doing anything malicious, it was simply about finding a safe space to express my true feelings. Anyone in my position would have sought solace elsewhere after being starved of affection for so long. Instead of behaving like a mature, rational adult and addressing our marital distance, Mark decided to violate my absolute right to privacy. He actively snooped through my personal phone like a common thief and uncovered a few completely harmless, private text messages between Julian and me. There was absolutely no context to what he read, just a beautiful, emotional connection that he completely distorted in his mind. A real partner would have sat down, apologized for his neglect, and asked how we could work through my emotional dissatisfaction together. Instead, Mark completely lost his mind, inflating a minor lapse in communication into some grand, unforgivable betrayal. The sheer disrespect in his voice was something I refused to tolerate from anyone, let alone a man I legally married. He didn't even have the decency to discuss the matter calmly or listen to my perfectly logical explanation of the circumstances. Instead, he began aggressively grabbing my things from the closet, throwing my beautiful designer clothes into suitcases like an unhinged maniac. He literally pointed at the front door of our shared home and told me to get out immediately, entirely disregarding my comfort and safety. It was the most shocking display of fragile masculinity and dramatic exaggeration I have ever witnessed in my entire life. I was not about to let him see me cry or give him the satisfaction of thinking he had any real power over my life. To humble his pathetic little ego and show him that I possess infinitely better options, I looked him dead in the eye and laughed directly in his face. I confidently told him that his little tantrum didn't matter in the slightest because my lover was already on his way to rescue me from this toxic environment. I immediately pulled out my phone right in front of him and called Julian, letting Mark hear every single word. I demanded that Julian come pick me up right this second to prove a point to my dramatic husband. To my absolute delight and utter satisfaction, Julian proved his devotion by showing up at our driveway in 10 minutes flat. He didn't just pull up in any regular vehicle, he arrived driving his gorgeous, top-tier luxury sports car that literally screams wealth and status. The engine rumbled beautifully, echoing through the entire neighborhood and making our house look incredibly small and insignificant. I turned back to give Mark the most smug, triumphant look possible as I grabbed my suitcases and walked out the door. It was the perfect moment of validation, proving to my husband that I am a high-value woman who deserves the absolute best. I slid into the pristine leather passenger seat, feeling the immediate rush of luxury that I am naturally meant to experience. Julian looked as handsome and composed as ever, instantly validating my decision to step away from Mark's chaotic emotional outbursts. We went for a lovely, peaceful drive around the city, letting the smooth ride wash away the stress of my husband's childish behavior. I spent the entire time explaining how horribly Mark had treated me, expecting Julian to immediately offer me full emotional and physical sanctuary. Julian listened quietly, nodding along as we drove down the scenic highway while the sun began to set. As soon as the sky turned dark and the sun fully started to set, the entire atmosphere inside the luxury vehicle suddenly shifted. Julian pulled over to the side of the road, looked directly at me with a completely blank expression, and asked the most baffling question, "And where am I going to drop you off?" I sat there completely stunned, assuming he was playing some sort of incredibly tasteless, poorly timed joke on me. I explained that Mark had just kicked me out of our house and that I obviously needed to stay with him in his luxurious home. That is when the horrific truth finally came out, completely shattering my expectations of his character. It turns out that Julian is an absolute hypocrite who expects me to just magically find my own accommodation because he has a wife and a family home to protect. He had the absolute nerve to tell me that our little arrangement was never meant to disrupt his comfortable domestic life. I was entirely blindsided by his sheer selfishness and his sudden, cowardly refusal to step up when I needed him most. He completely minimized my entire situation, acting as if his marriage was a valid excuse to abandon a high-quality woman on the street. It is deeply disgusting how men can talk a big game about luxury and devotion but completely fold the second real responsibility arises. Because of their combined pettiness, I am currently stuck living inside a deeply depressing, cheap local motel that is completely beneath my standards. I am absolutely furious at how unfairly I am being treated by every single man in my life right now. How can Mark just throw me out over a simple mistake without trying to understand my perspective or apologize for his aggressive tone? And how can Julian be so incredibly selfish, hiding behind his marriage just to avoid giving me the luxury apartment I clearly deserve? They have both managed to ruin my peace of mind entirely because of their own deep-seated insecurities and lack of maturity. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says you literally cheated on your husband, bragged about your lover, and now you're mad that neither man wants to deal with your toxic baggage? You have zero accountability. OP's reply excuse me, but Mark completely overreacted over a few harmless, private text messages without even trying to understand my emotional neglect. As for Julian, he completely misled me about his availability and lifestyle, so I am the actual victim of their mutual dishonesty here. Anonymous user 2 says that expensive sports car didn't buy you a roof over your head, did it? It's hilarious that your big moment to humble your husband ended with you sitting in a cheap motel. OP's reply that top-tier vehicle completely proves Julian's high status and what I am actually worth, unlike Mark's pathetic budget. Julian's wife is probably just a deeply toxic, controlling woman who is temporarily managing his assets right now anyway. Update 1. It's been 3 days since my last update. After spending 72 hours stewing in this hideous motel room, I decided that I absolutely wasn't going to let Julian off the hook for abandoning me so cruelly. I am a woman of action, and I refuse to let people treat me like a temporary distraction without facing serious consequences. I spent hours digging through various social media platforms until I successfully tracked down his clueless wife's private accounts. My primary objective was to ensure she saw exactly what kind of unfaithful man she was sharing a home with. I gathered every single romantic message, every promise he made, and sent them directly to her inbox. In my mind, the logical outcome was entirely clear and would perfectly solve all my current logistical problems. I fully assumed that his wife would possess some basic self-respect, immediately throw him out of their house, and file for divorce. Once he was homeless and exposed, Julian would have no choice but to come crawling back to my motel room to beg for my forgiveness. He would finally be forced to do the right thing and set up a beautiful, luxury apartment for the two of us to live in permanently. It was a perfectly executed strategy designed to force him to take full responsibility for his misleading behavior. Unfortunately, my plan completely backfired in the most deeply unfair and unpredictable way possible. Julian's wife did not leave him or throw him out of the family home like any normal, dignified woman would have done. Instead, she chose to inflict a completely separate, malicious punishment that showed her true, vindictive nature. She immediately went to the bank and completely froze all of their joint bank accounts and financial assets within an hour. It turns out that she is actually the primary earner in that household, a pathetic detail that Julian had conveniently hidden from me. Julian called my phone a few hours later, literally screaming like an absolute madman and showing a complete lack of class. He didn't even bother to ask how I was doing or apologize for his previous abandonment of our emotional connection. He kept shouting that I had entirely ruined his comfortable, luxurious lifestyle and destroyed his financial security. The coward actually had the nerve to declare that he never wants to see my beautiful face ever again before hanging up on me. It is truly pathetic how a man can completely change his tone the exact second his allowance gets cut off by his wife. Now, I am facing an incredibly stressful situation because I am rapidly running out of money to pay for this terrible motel. This entire financial crisis is completely Julian's fault because he chose to be an absolute coward instead of a real man. If he had just been honest about his financial dependence on his wife, I would have approached the situation differently. He completely used his expensive car to manipulate my perception of his wealth and independence. It is deeply unfair that I am the one suffering the consequences of his fraudulent lifestyle and his wife's extreme financial control. I am forced to sit here in these substandard conditions, listening to the loud noises from the highway outside my window. The lack of accountability from everyone involved in this scenario is truly mind-boggling to experience firsthand. Mark is still sitting comfortably in our house, completely ignoring his legal duties as a provider while I am forced to budget my remaining cash. Julian is probably hiding behind his wife's skirt, begging her to restore his credit cards like a child. Neither of them has the maturity to realize how much psychological damage they have inflicted upon me over the past few days. I tried to call Julian back multiple times to demand an explanation and force him to at least pay for my motel room expenses. Every single one of my calls went straight to voicemail, proving that he has blocked my number entirely like a true child. He completely lacks the basic decency to face the woman whose life he has single-handedly upended with his false promises. A real gentleman would have ensured that I was financially taken care of, regardless of his domestic drama at home. His behavior is a clear reflection of his low character and his inability to handle a high-value woman. The staff at this front desk are already starting to look at me with judgment whenever I walk past the lobby. They have absolutely no right to judge a guest who is clearly dealing with an unprecedented streak of terrible luck and male incompetence. I have always maintained an impeccable standard of living, and being reduced to counting pennies is deeply insulting to my identity. I am constantly forced to justify my presence here to people who aren't even worthy of speaking to me in normal circumstances. The entire universe seems to be conspiring to test my patience through these ridiculous, uncultured individuals. I am heavily contemplating my next strategic move because I refuse to remain trapped in this victimized position for much longer. A woman with my level of intelligence and social standing always finds a way to regain her rightful place on top. I just need to figure out a way to make Mark realize how empty his life is without my presence. He has had 3 full days to sit in that quiet house and contemplate the sheer severity of his overreaction. Surely, the guilt of leaving his wedded wife in a dingy motel must be starting to weigh heavily on his conscience. I will never understand how a minor lapse in judgment on my part could justify this level of cruelty from multiple parties. A marriage is supposed to withstand small obstacles, not completely crumble the moment a husband finds a few text messages. Mark's total lack of empathy and communication skills is the root cause of this entire cascading disaster. If he had just fulfilled my emotional needs from the beginning, none of this would have ever happened. I am determined to hold my ground and force him to acknowledge his massive failure as a husband. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says your master plan completely blew up in your face. You tried to ruin his marriage to force him to buy you an apartment, and instead, you just got yourself blocked and left broke. OP's reply: I actually performed a vital public service by exposing a compulsive liar to his wife, so my actions were completely justified. Julian heavily owes me substantial financial compensation for manipulating my emotions and pretending to be an independent, wealthy man. Anonymous user 2 says you are literally running out of money in a cheap motel and you're still acting like a queen. How do you plan on surviving without a husband or a lover to pay your bills? OP's reply: Mark is still legally obligated to fully support me financially because we are legally married under the law. My current lack of funds is a temporary issue that my husband is legally required to fix once he stops throwing his childish tantrum. Update 2. It's been 1 week since my last update. Since Julian is completely out of the picture due to his utter cowardice, I decided to be the bigger person and give Mark a generous opportunity to apologize for kicking me out. I packed my remaining things from the motel and took a taxi directly back to our family home, fully expecting him to welcome me with open arms. To my absolute shock and horror, I discovered that the front door locks had been entirely changed without my consent. Mark stubbornly refused to even open the door or look at me through the window when I knocked. He sat inside like a ghost, completely ignoring my presence and my rightful access to my own marital property. Finding myself completely out of immediate options and refusing to return to that hideous motel, I had to think quickly to protect my interests. I made the executive decision to spend the absolute last of my personal savings to rent a small, overpriced Airbnb located directly on the very same street. My primary strategy was to keep an incredibly close eye on Mark and catch him slipping up in his daily routine. I fully assumed that a hypocrite like him would immediately try to bring another woman over the moment he thought I was gone. Having concrete proof of his infidelity would instantly give me the upper hand in any future legal or personal negotiations. I spent the first few days sitting by the window of that temporary rental, meticulously tracking every single movement around my former home. It was an exhausting task, but I was fully committed to exposing his double standards to the world. Instead of seeing another woman arrive, a massive commercial moving truck pulled up directly in front of our driveway earlier today. I initially thought he was doing some redecorating or perhaps moving some heavy furniture out of the living room. I watched with growing confusion as the workers began carrying out items that looked distinctly familiar from a distance. My heart completely stopped when I realized that Mark wasn't moving another woman in or rearranging the living space at all. He was actively instructing the moving crew to carefully pack up all of my highly valuable designer bags, luxury shoes, and expensive items. These were my personal possessions, pieces of my identity that I had carefully curated over several years of marriage. To see random strangers carelessly handling my luxury goods was an absolute insult to my dignity and my status. I pounded on the Airbnb window, but the distance was too far for anyone to hear my righteous outrage. Just as I was about to storm across the street and physically stop this robbery, my phone buzzed with a cold, heartless text message from Mark. He explicitly stated that he was liquidating every single one of my luxury items to fully cover the damages to the house and the rent I haven't paid. He had the absolute audacity to claim that my behavior had caused him financial strain that required immediate compensation. The sheer malice behind his text was completely staggering, proving that he has transformed into a vindictive monster. He is actively stealing my personal property under the guise of legal and financial justification. My entire strategy to stay close and control his actions completely backfired and destroyed whatever financial leverage I had left. If I hadn't spent my last savings on this Airbnb, I would at least have some emergency funds to hire a proper lawyer to sue him. Instead, I am trapped across the street, watching my beautiful lifestyle being loaded into the back of a dirty moving truck. The level of premeditated cruelty Mark is displaying is entirely disproportionate to the minor mistake I made weeks ago. He is deliberately trying to strip away my identity and reduce me to nothing out of pure spite. I tried calling his phone repeatedly to demand that he halt this illegal auction of my personal belongings immediately. As expected, my calls were rejected instantly, leaving me with no choice but to watch the truck drive away with my treasures. Those designer bags were not just simple accessories, they represented my social standing and my hard-earned place in society. Mark knows exactly how much those items meant to me, which is precisely why he chose to target them so viciously. It is the ultimate act of a small, weak man who cannot handle a woman of superior taste. The owner of this Airbnb has already messaged me to remind me that my reservation ends in a few days and cannot be extended. The walls of this small rental are starting to feel like a prison, suffocating me with the reality of my temporary displacement. I am surrounded by cheap furniture that insults my aesthetic sensibilities while my actual home sits empty across the pavement. The entire neighborhood looks completely different now, filled with judgmental eyes that fail to see the true victim in this scenario. I am being forced into a corner by a husband who values money over marital loyalty and communication. I refuse to let him see me defeated, even if my current financial situation is looking incredibly bleak due to his thievery. Tomorrow, I will find a way to confront him publicly where he cannot hide behind locked doors and hired moving crews. He needs to face the consequences of his actions and see the pain he is causing his wedded wife. The community needs to know the truth about the monster living among them in that pristine house. I will make sure everyone understands that Mark is a thief who robs his own family to satisfy his fragile ego. It is truly mind-boggling how a civilized society allows a man to legally liquidate his wife's belongings without a proper court order. Mark's actions are completely illegal in my eyes, regardless of what his cold text messages claim about damages and unpaid rent. He is using financial warfare to punish me for his own inability to communicate like a mature adult. I am the one who built the elegance of that home, and he has no right to strip it away from me. I will fight until I regain every single item that belongs to my high-value lifestyle. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says you literally rented an Airbnb just to spy on your ex and try to catch him with another woman? That is textbook stalking behavior, and you completely deserve to watch your bags get carted away. OP's reply: I was not stalking, I was actively protecting my rightful marital property from a literal thief who refuses to communicate. Mark is deliberately acting out of pure malice, and checking on my own home is a completely normal reaction to being locked out. Anonymous user 2 says the poetic justice of watching your luxury designer items get sold to pay for your husband's damages is absolutely beautiful. You cared more about those bags than your own marriage. OP's reply: those luxury items completely define my personal identity and social status, so losing them is an absolute tragedy. Mark only sold them because he knows he could never afford to buy me things of that caliber on his own poor merits. Update 3. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. Things have officially gone from bad to absolute worst in a matter of days. I completely ran out of money for the Airbnb across the street, forcing me to pack my remaining suitcases with nowhere left to turn. Instead of hiding away in shame, I decided to take matters into my own hands and confront Mark at the local grocery store. I knew he did his shopping there every Tuesday afternoon, making it the perfect venue to demand the financial support I am legally owed. I intercepted him right in the middle of the produce aisle, determined to get answers. To force him to hand over immediate allowance money, I intentionally began making a massive, highly emotional public scene right there. I started crying loudly, letting the tears stream down my face while shouting that he had left his own faithful wife completely homeless. I wanted every single shopper and store employee to see what an ungrateful, cruel man he truly was behind closed doors. The entire aisle ground to a halt as people stopped pushing their carts to stare at the unfolding drama. I felt a surge of confidence, fully believing that public pressure would finally force him to cave and hand over his wallet. Mark didn't even have the decency to yell back or match my emotional intensity like a passionate husband should. He didn't look embarrassed at all. Instead, he maintained an incredibly creepy, calm demeanor that sent chills down my spine. He slowly pulled his smartphone out of his pocket while the store manager rushed over to defuse the loud confrontation. Without saying a single word to me, Mark calmly played a loud audio recording directly to the manager and the growing crowd of bystanders. It was the exact recording from the day he kicked me out, capturing my voice perfectly. The entire grocery store could clearly hear my voice bragging about Julian's immensely expensive luxury sports car and laughing in Mark's face. My own words echoed through the produce section, completely stripped of the emotional context and provocation that caused them. Everyone in the immediate vicinity started whispering intensely, shaking their heads, and looking at me as if I were absolute garbage. The sympathy I had carefully built up vanished in an instant, replaced by waves of pure judgment from total strangers. I stood there completely humiliated, unable to stop the recording from destroying my carefully managed public reputation. To make matters significantly worse, my absolute disaster of a day didn't even end at the local grocery store. Someone in the crowd had recorded the entire dramatic confrontation on their phone and uploaded it to the internet where it went viral locally. My own parents unfortunately saw the video trending online and recognized me instantly in that humiliating state. Instead of offering unconditional love and immediate emotional support during my time of need, they called my phone to express their complete shame. They screamed that my behavior was utterly unacceptable and entirely self-inflicted from start to finish. They delivered the final, devastating blow by stating that I am absolutely forbidden from moving into their empty guest room under any circumstances. They chose to believe an edited, viral video over the word of their own daughter who was clearly suffering a mental crisis. My desperate attempt to publicly shame Mark completely backfired and left me totally isolated from my own immediate family. It is deeply disgusting how your own blood relatives can abandon you the exact second your public image faces a minor setback. They have proven themselves to be just as toxic and unsupportive as the men I left behind. I am now left wandering the streets with my suitcases, feeling the crushing weight of absolute abandonment from every corner of my life. Mark's use of that audio recording was a calculated act of psychological warfare designed to completely destroy my social standing. He deliberately manipulated those innocent bystanders into thinking he was the victim of my harmless, defensive comments. A real man would never use a private argument to publicly humiliate the woman he swore to protect for life. His actions in that store prove that he has no legal or moral right to call himself a husband. The sheer hypocrisy of the people judging me in that grocery store is truly laughable when you think about it. None of those strangers know the daily emotional neglect I had to endure under Mark's roof before I sought solace elsewhere. They completely jumped to conclusions based on a few seconds of audio, completely ignoring the complex dynamics of a modern relationship. Society always loves to crucify a strong, high-value woman the moment she expresses her frustration out loud. I refuse to accept their judgment because their opinions mean absolutely nothing to someone of my innate caliber. My parents' reaction is perhaps the most painful betrayal of all, considering I have always tried to make them proud. They have completely forgotten everything I have done for this family, choosing to lock their doors to me when I need them most. Their guest room sits empty while their own flesh and blood is forced to contemplate sleeping in a public shelter. It is clear that their love was always conditional, based entirely on maintaining a fake surface appearance for their friends. I am better off without their toxic, judgmental energy dragging me down into their narrow-minded worldview. I am currently sitting on a park bench, trying to formulate a new plan to survive this unprecedented streak of terrible luck. The world seems determined to punish me for simply trying to fulfill my basic human need for affection and appreciation. Every step I take to rectify the situation is met with extreme hostility and unfair consequences from the people around me. But I am a survivor, and I will find a way to make everyone regret the way they treated me during this brief period of hardship. They will all see that you cannot keep a woman like me down for long. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says Mark playing that audio recording in the middle of the grocery store is absolute gold. It was so satisfying to see your public lies completely exposed right in front of everyone. OP's reply: Mark's behavior was a highly calculated act of psychological warfare meant to manipulate naive bystanders into taking his side. He completely stripped my words of context just to avoid his marital duties and hide his own massive failures as a husband. Anonymous user 2 says, wow, even your own parents can't stand your toxic behavior and banned you from their house. You are completely isolated now because you brought this entire disaster upon yourself. OP's reply: my family is deeply toxic and narrow-minded, completely failing to understand my true value or offer unconditional love when I needed it. They chose to believe a viral video over their own daughter, which shows their utter lack of character. Update 4. It's been 1 month since my last update. My life has completely transformed into a living nightmare that is entirely unsuited for a woman of my high standards. I am currently forced to live in a terrible, incredibly cramped room-share apartment with 3 complete strangers who possess absolutely no sense of etiquette. The space is completely suffocating, smelling constantly of cheap food and laundry detergent that insults my refined senses every single day. To afford this miserable accommodation, I had to take a basic, deeply humiliating retail job just to buy food to eat. It is an absolute tragedy that someone with my intelligence and beauty is reduced to folding clothes for ungrateful customers. Yesterday afternoon, while I was standing near the glass storefront of my miserable workplace, the final insult to my dignity occurred. I looked out at the street and saw Mark driving past in a brand new, incredibly expensive luxury vehicle. He looked infuriatingly happy and completely relaxed, as if he hadn't spent the last month destroying his wife's entire existence. He didn't even notice me standing there in my cheap uniform, working a low-wage job just to survive the day. Seeing him thrive while I am trapped in this economic prison sent a wave of absolute fury through my entire body. My entire plan to use Julian's luxury to spite Mark, and then my subsequent attempts to force my way back, completely erased my comfortable life. I lost my gorgeous home, my beautiful lifestyle, and my social dignity, all because the men in my life chose to be incredibly dramatic and selfish. I am still forced to sleep on a tiny twin mattress on the floor, staring at the peeling wallpaper every single night. I spend hours wondering why everyone suddenly decided to treat me so terribly over a minor relationship issue that could have been solved with a simple conversation. The lack of basic empathy from my husband, my lover, and my parents is truly the most shocking part of this entire ordeal. The strangers I share this apartment with have absolutely no idea who I truly am or the luxury I am accustomed to experiencing. They treat me like an equal, which is deeply insulting given my natural superiority and refined background. I refuse to mingle with them in the kitchen, preferring to stay locked in my tiny room to preserve whatever dignity I have left. They live their small, mundane lives without any ambition, completely content with mediocrity while I am actively suffering an artistic and social tragedy. This environment is temporary, but the psychological toll of being surrounded by such low-class behavior is immensely draining. My job at the retail store is another daily exercise in extreme patience and self-control. The manager is a petty tyrant who loves to give me ridiculous tasks that are completely beneath my skill set. I am forced to smile at rude customers who wouldn't even be allowed to look at me if I still had my husband's credit cards. Every transaction is a painful reminder of the financial freedom that Mark illegally stripped away from me when he sold my designer goods. I am counting down the days until I can find a way out of this retail hell and reclaim my rightful place in high society. I still cannot comprehend how Mark managed to buy a brand new vehicle while leaving his legal wife completely destitute and working for minimum wage. It is clear that he used the money from liquidating my precious designer bags to fund his new luxury lifestyle. He is literally driving around in a car paid for by my personal identity and style, which is the ultimate form of marital theft. The legal system in this country is completely broken if a husband can get away with such blatant financial abuse without any consequences. I will never forgive him for using my hard-earned luxury to elevate his own pathetic social standing. Julian has completely vanished from the social circles we used to frequent, likely still hiding from his controlling wife like a scolded puppy. I occasionally look at his social media from a fake account just to see if he has regained any shred of his masculinity. It seems his wife keeps him on an incredibly short leash now that his financial secrets have been fully exposed to the world. He deserves every single bit of misery he is experiencing for being such a cowardly, misleading partner to a high-value woman like me. He had the chance to be my savior, but he chose to remain a pathetic dependent to his primary earner. My parents haven't called me once since that terrible day at the grocery store, completely cementing their status as fair-weather relatives. They would rather pretend I don't exist than face the slight social awkwardness of a viral video within their small, gossipy friend group. Their abandonment has shown me that the only person I can truly rely on in this cruel world is myself. I don't need their empty guest room or their fake affection to rebuild my empire from scratch. Once I am back on top, they will be the first ones trying to crawl back into my life, and I will gladly slam the door in their faces. I am currently looking into various online opportunities to leverage my beauty and intelligence into a more lucrative career path. Retail is merely a stepping stone, a temporary setback in what will ultimately be a grand story of personal triumph against all odds. I am reading books on strategy and influence, ensuring that my next partner will be completely under my control from day one. I will never make the mistake of trusting a man's surface wealth or a husband's fake promises of lifelong protection ever again. The next chapter of my life will be defined by absolute control and unyielding standards. As I lie on this uncomfortable twin mattress tonight, I remain entirely convinced that I did nothing to deserve this extreme level of mistreatment. A minor lapse in relationship communication should never result in a woman losing her home, her family, and her entire lifestyle. Mark's dramatic overreaction and Julian's cowardly selfishness are the true crimes that occurred in this story. The world may look at me and see a retail worker in a shared room, but I know that I am still the ultimate prize. I will survive this temporary chaos, and my eventual comeback will leave everyone who wronged me completely full of regret.